Hi everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video. And today I'm going to be taking a deep dive, closer look at an album that is both loved and reviled. And that is Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band Trout Mask Replica. Yes, this was a polarizing album. It turned 52 this week, and it is definitely an album that people either really love or they really hate it. To give you some examples about some reactions, if you're unfamiliar with this record, and perhaps you are, and you are perhaps in the camp that just you don't understand it, you hate it, and it's understandable that you would have that reaction. But cartoonist Matt Groening talked about it, and he has been a Frank Zappa fan, and at the time he would have been 15 years old when this album was released. And so he's a bit older than I am. He's like 4 years older than I am. Although I do remember long before The Simpsons about his comic strip, Life in Hell, which was a regular or made a regular appearance in a sort of socialist tabloid. I believe it was the tabloid In These Times, which is something that I read in high school. But anyway, he was ahead of the curve in terms of compared with me. And when he was talking about the record, I found this quote that I will read to you. He said, "I thought it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. I said to myself, they're not even trying. It was just a sloppy cacophony. Then I listened to it a couple more times because I couldn't believe Frank Zappa could do this to me." Because Frank Zappa was involved in the recording and production of the album. "And because a double album costs a lot of money. About the third time, I realized they were doing it on purpose. They meant it to sound exactly that way. And about the sixth or seventh time, it clicked in, and I thought it was the greatest album I'd ever heard." Critic Robert Christgau, in 1969, when the album was released, he wrote for his consumer guide in the Village Voice, saying that the weirdness of the album prevented him from giving it a higher grade, even though it is, quote, "great played at high volume when you're feeling shitty, because you'll never feel as shitty as this record," end quote. Okay, well, then, filmmaker David Lynch has called Trout Mask Replica his favorite album of all time. But let's not forget that David Lynch is also the person who gave us the film Eraserhead, which, by the way, I think is a great film too. And then there's Steve Vai, guitar virtuoso, who played with and recorded with Frank Zappa for a while. He also praised the album, Trout Mask Replica, but admitted the first time he heard it, he was appalled by how out of tune it sounded, and also by Van Vliet's vocals. But after meeting Don, the captain, he gave the album another try, and then he compared this re-listening to a liberation. So it's clear that for most people, this album is a challenge. It was a challenge for me as well, and it requires multiple listenings before you either become comfortable with it and then you start to enjoy what is being presented, or even after multiple listenings, you're just simply going to say, this is garbage. And there are a lot of people who respond that way. because there are a lot of people who cannot even get past the first listen. So this was released in June 16th of 1969. So that makes it, 52 years old this year. And it was on the straight label, as I showed right here. Excuse me, I didn't show yet. The straight label, but my copy is a reissue on the red vinyl. It's not an original. And this was a new label for Frank Zappa. Now, I was 10 going on 11, and I really didn't know about it at the time of the release. Later, when I was in high school, well, I'll say like about a freshman in high school or maybe sophomore, when I was about 14 or 15, my first exposure to any songs on this record were via compilations. The first one being this one. It's called The Big Ball, all right, which is this compilation. It was part of the Lost Leaders with Warner Brothers. You could, if you bought a Warner Brother record at the time, they had a little order form. You sent in $1 and they would send you, a double record like this that would have various songs from musical artists that were on the Warner label. And on this one, The Big Ball, is the song Ella Guru, which, at that time I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I liked Ella Guru. It sounded fun. It sounded different, but it was still fun. And then also another one of these types of lost leaders that Frank Zappa did, this one, Zapped, which he was releasing at that time on his Bizarre label. Also something that you could send in $1 to get. This has the blimp and the song Old Fart at Play, which are also on Trout Mask Replica. The blimp I'll talk a little bit about later, because again, I really loved it. I thought it was funny. It was really quite a funny song to me, but that was it. That was kind of my limit to knowing anything about Trout Mask Replica until many years later, because I, at the time, was living in this rural area of Michigan. I was an infrequent visitor to record stores. Most of my records I was getting from, the Columbia House Record Club. So I wasn't necessarily getting very many, I didn't even know about Captain Beefheart. So the whole recording process that went on in the production of this record is really going to exemplify both Beefheart's dark side as well as his creativity. And it also kind of provides a glimpse into his relationship with Frank Zappa, which over time became more and more fragmented and difficult. They go back a long way, Frank and the Captain. So Don Van Vliet is, his name. He got the name Captain Beefheart from Frank Zappa, although Beefheart has claimed that it was his idea, that he came up with the moniker. But nonetheless, it did come from various projects that Frank was working on at the time, and one that included a character named Captain Beefheart that Don portrayed. And this included an oratorio that Frank was working on that was titled Captain Beefheart versus the Grunt People. So a lot of the information I'm bringing into this video, it comes from material that I've read about Frank Zappa. Also, as sources, I am using one of these 33 1/3 books. This one about Trout Mask Replica by Kevin Currier. I am also using a sort of autobiography called Lunar Notes by Zoothorn Rollo, who's Bill Harkleroad, a guitarist for the Magic Band. And then also, although I have not finished this book, information that is coming from this biography, Captain Beefheart, the biography by Mike Barnes. So, Don Van Vliet is his real name. But his birth name is actually Don Glenn Vliet, or Vliet. He was born January 15th, 1941, and he died December 17th in 2010. Now, he was born in Glendale, California, and he enjoyed sculpting and drawing. And in fact, he studied under the tutelage of Portuguese sculptor Augustonia Rodrigues, all right? And he won a scholarship to go to Europe and study art in Europe. His parents, however, said no. They didn't want their son going to Europe and become corrupted by European homosexuals. So instead, they moved to, of all places, Lancaster, California. They believed that in the desert out there, their son would be safe from any negative influences. And then he went to Lancaster High School, and that's where he discovered R&B and the blues. And also, that's where he met Frank Zappa. So they were high school chums. And Don eventually, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if he formally dropped out or he just stopped going to school. He was older than Frank because Don's father had a heart attack, and his father drove this bread truck. And so he took over driving the truck for his father so that the family could still have some money coming in. And Don and Frank bonded over their mutual love of music, particular R&B, doo-wop, and the blues. And also food, because of the food that, the bread that and the different items, confections that they would get out of the truck. And their hangout routine basically would be that they would cruise around for chicks, and when they didn't get any, didn't score any, they'd go back home to Frank's house, and then they would listen to records into the wee hours of the morning. And they would be in these intense competitions where they would be quizzing each other about records, who was singing on them, what was the B-side, all this stuff about these musicians and bands and songs, of this era in the 50s. And Frank was also at that time, that's about when he started to learn how to play guitar, primarily learning from the style of Johnny Guitar Watson. And it was apparent that, Don could sing, but he was described as being mic shy. He would become self-conscious of his singing to the point that his rhythm would get thrown off. So Zappa said that to get, because he recognized that Don had a good singing voice, particularly for the blues, but you had to trick him into singing. Now, if you've not listened to Captain Beefheart sing before, I think one of the best ways to describe his voice is that it sounds like howling wolf, but also it sounds like his vocal cords are about to explode. All right, so when Don, or the captain, became more comfortable with his voice and singing, the power of that voice was immediately apparent. In fact, during the recording sessions of the Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band's first record, which is this one, Safe as Milk, his voice, because of the volume and power in his voice, wrecked a microphone. He blew out a $1,200 Telefunken microphone during a recording session for Safe as Milk. So, yeah, eventually, Don, got a band put together with some other people, and they were starting to play gigs. And a lot of them were still pretty young. They were like 16 years old, Don being older, the captain being older. And they got this gig in the LA area, can't remember exactly where, but at this festival, they were like in these booths, and they were next to a booth or stage where there was this band where Ry Cooder and Taj Mahal and some others were all playing together in this band. And Don was hearing them, and he went over to his guitarist at that time, Captain Beefheart's guitarist, Doug Moon, and just started harassing him, saying, hey, this is the sound I'm looking for. Why can't you play like that? All right, I want you to do that. Why can't you do that? This was kind of like the beginning of this toxic personality that Captain Beefheart had, particularly with the people in his band. So eventually, though, Captain Beefheart did get Ry Cooder into the band, and he is recorded, on their first album, Safe as Milk. But that didn't last very long. Cooder got scared away because Beefheart was taking a lot of LSD, and he was, as I say, he was already exhibiting this pattern of behavior where he would just attack and vilify members of the band for very trivial reasons. So Cooder was like, okay, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm out of the band. So they started working on the next album, which was strictly personal, and that's not, I don't have that album. But the ideas for Trout Mask Replica were starting to build up at this point. So we're talking about 1968, 67, 68. And Trout Mask Replica became Beefheart's obsession. And he was essentially, with this, no longer at all pretending that the music was a band collaboration. It was all Viet. Beefheart would, in fact, during the songwriting for Trout Mask Replica, Beefheart would just like bang out these melodies or pseudo melodies on this upright piano in the house where they were staying. And he didn't know how to play piano. He really did not know how to play piano. He would just be playing around with the keys, and then this musical idea would come to him, and then he would say, okay, this is what we're doing, all right? And so it fell onto Bill Harkleroad, who joined the band after Ry Cooder departed, and who became known as Bill Harkleroad. Everybody got new names for this record. And Bill Harkleroad became Zoothorn Rollo. There is also Antenna Jimmy Siemens, and the Mascara Snake, and Rocket Morton. They got all these other names. But anyway, so Harkleroad would take these notes and these ideas from Captain Beefheart and then kind of piece them together into a composition, and then he would write all the music for each part for each of the musicians in the band, then hand out that music to the band members, and then they would practice relentlessly, hours upon hours every day, because the music had no room at all for improvisation. It had to be played exact. And so this led to these like mammoth rehearsal sessions at the house that they were staying in. The captain got them all together in this house. And so even though Harkleroad was essentially taking these very fragmented ideas, he got no credit for turning them into songs. as it says inside in the liner notes, all songs written by Captain Beefheart. And while definitely the lyrics are Captain Beefheart's lyrics, it's really kind of a stretch to say that he wrote the songs. But he took all the credit for it, and as a result, Harkleroad got no income. Nobody in the band really got any income from any of the songs and the music from Trout Mask Replica. So they would be having these rehearsal sessions that were super, super draining. They were like never ending. They had no money. There was hardly any food. The Captain Beefheart would get money from his mother so that they could buy groceries and pay bills. And then so there was this going on, but they also endured these tyrannical outbursts by Captain Beefheart, who had this habit of just picking out a band member and just haranguing them, focusing all this negative energy on them mercilessly, sometimes intentionally, to try and force them out of the band. Because, after this would go on for like several days, they would feel like dying. They would feel like they were at the verge of an emotional breakdown. And Beefheart was so unstable that no one could really predict what would set him off or who might be the next target. So they would be enduring this, and then they'd be rehearsing 12 to 14 hours a day. They never went anywhere. They weren't allowed outside of the house except on very, very rare occasions. In fact, Beefheart was reportedly going to the library to read books on mind control and how to control people. And so individual members of the band would make these plans that they were gonna escape in the middle of the night. And they even went as far as to take bundles of clothes and then hide them on the other side of the road, so that they could pick them up whenever they would like make their dash. But they, none of them really did that, because there were these moments when they were really believing in the music that they were creating together. Now, Zappa was brought in to record it, and they got signed to Straight Records. And they did a lot of recording initially at the house that they were staying in. But virtually everything got re-recorded again in a studio with Frank. But there were some parts, and you can hear these individual parts on the record and tell that they were recorded inside the house, particularly the sessions that were recorded with a little portable cassette player, because you can hear them push the button clicking on and off. But all this rehearsal that they went through when they did come to the studio, because I don't think Frank was at the house doing some recording. He sent somebody else, a recording engineer, to do the recording at the house. But when they came into the recording studio, Zappa was amazed at the players' skill, because they played and recorded the entire album in one take. And that just amazed Frank that they could do that. So those murderous rehearsals apparently paid off. Now, the voice recordings, however, that was another matter. Beefheart's craziness was partly responsible for the move to the studio. For example, he believed that the trees were dying because of the noise inside the house. So he brought in these tree surgeons to nurse these eucalyptus trees and these other trees that were on the property back into health. And then he expected the record company to pay for these tree surgeons. But the record company refused to, but that still didn't stop Don from sending the bill to the record company. And then also Beefheart started accusing Frank of being cheap with the recording equipment and techniques and everything, that he was messing with his creative energy. And then when they were in the studio and they were recording Don's vocals for the record, he refused to wear headphones. So he would sing just as loud as he could, all right, and without headphones. So he was very seldom in sync with the music because he wasn't, able to hear what they had already recorded in one take. And he would be yelling so loud or singing so loud at times that they could hear him through all the different layers of glass into the control room. There were some other interesting things too. Like, for example, the song The Blimp was recorded over the phone. All right, so Jeff Cotton was reading a poem to Don while Don was lying in bed. And he told Jeff, hey, call Frank up and tell him this poem. So they did. They called Frank at his studio. He was in the studio at that time working on something. And so this Jeff Cotton started reciting the poem, The Blimp, the blimp, the blimp, the mothership, the mothership. So Frank said, wait a minute, I want to record this. So he starts recording this over the phone. And so he goes through and recites the poem. And then at the end, Frank tells him, hey, thanks, I gotta go, bye, and then just hangs up. But that was how, it got recorded. So yeah, there are a lot of songs. It's a double album. I'm going to use some of the notes also that were recorded by Zoothorn Rollo about some of the songs. Frownland is the opener, and it really is a very interesting song. Harkleroad says it was one of his favorites, song in 7/8. And then there's the sort of recited poem, The Dust Blows Forward and Dust Blows Back. This is one of those songs you can hear the sound of the blipping when the portable cassette player recorder, the on and off button, is being pressed. There's Dachau blues, which comes closest to the type of blues that the band used to be playing, and that many of the members of the band really wanted to play. They really wanted to be a blues band. And there's always a bit of blues and R&B to a lot of the material, throughout the catalog of Beefheart's. But this one is definitely a very bluesy and much more serious. It's not a funny, glib song, obviously, with the singing about Dachau and the concentration camp at Dachau. Then there's Ella Guru. Ella Guru. It's this crazy, crazy song. When I first heard it, I really, really liked it. And as I said, when I started listening to the entirety of the album, it was jarring at first, but I think I was prepared for everything else on the album because I had separately listened to songs like The Blimp, like Ella Guru, and Old Fart at Play, which again is this other song where Don is basically just reciting this story in poetic form, which, when you think about it, that's the best way to think about Captain Beefheart's music, especially with Trout Mask Replica, but not just with Trout Mask Replica. And that is the lyrics, the poems, the stories in the lyrics, that's the art form. And then the music is there as a supporting role. And that is what makes Beefheart's music, in my mind, so different from anything else. It's like nothing else that you would think about in terms of music. And we do get in these musical traps at times with these preconceived notions of what music ought to sound like. And people like Frank Zappa and Don Van Vliet and many others, Ornette Coleman at the time, Sun Ra, challenged us, as did many quote unquote orchestral composers, like Stravinsky and Varese, in the 20th century, challenged us in the way we thought about music and what it does and what it can do. But there were a lot of other ones here, other songs. Moonlight on Vermont is one that, this is interesting what Zoot Horn Rollo says about Moonlight on Vermont. After 30 years, it's hard to untangle hindsight from what I actually felt at the time, but I can always remember loving this tune. As a guitar player, there was a little more to hold on to. It was more of what I expected to be playing at the time. So, the musicians in the band really had these ideas based on Safe as Milk of where the band was going to go, what kind of music they were going to create. And when they got into Trout Mask Replica, it was like, all bets are off. China Pig is a song that just really comes off the cuff. And then there's this one called Neon Meat Dream of an Octofish, which there's a part in the record where they're outside, Don and somebody else are outside, and these neighbor kids were curious about what weirdness was going on at this house in the neighborhood. And you can hear this recording of Don talking to the kids, and he starts talking to them about an octofish. Funny stuff. Just a lot of really good songs in here. The Blimp, as I told you about how that was all came about. It is hard, an old-farted play. Of all the poetry, this is Zoot Horn Rollo, to me just demonstrates the best part of what Don had going for him. I mean, his lyrics, the overstated, over melodramatic delivery. It's timeless to me. And I think, when acquiring the taste for Captain Beefheart's music, that's an important thing to keep in mind. That, remember, he was a frustrated artist. He had an opportunity to go to Europe and study art, on this scholarship, that he studied art with, under the tutelage of another great artist. Later in his life, I mean, he did a lot of painting. Some of the record album covers of the Magic Band are examples of his artwork. He has quite a catalog of art that is really quite expressive. So he's coming from, this is the energy that's inside of him. And then he was finding a way to express it musically and orally as well. So as I was saying earlier, they didn't play a lot of these songs live because they were so intricate and exact. There wasn't a lot of room for them during a live show to kind of expand or contract the song, for, live play. They just weren't constructed that way. And then also throughout the years, there was already that tension building between the captain and Frank Zappa, and that remained rocky for the rest of their lives. Although there were moments when they would, kind of come back together. One of the last, I believe, being when they did the recording together with, and now I'm drawing the blank, the one where they did it at the Amarillo Center, Zappa and Beefheart, and, geez, what a drag it is getting old sometimes when you can't remember, but the record with Muffin Man on it. God, maybe it'll come to me before the end of before the end of this. But anyway, the relationship remained very rocky because their musical styles are really very dissimilar. And Beefheart at times accused Frank of stealing his ideas, like claiming that the idea behind Lumpy Gravy was, all his. And there were the other such allegations that were made. And that this could be related in part to all the LSD that Beefheart took. But, and Frank didn't use substances, all other than coffee and nicotine. And so there was that difference between them that would create a chasm at times between the two of them. But it also can maybe it relates back to, when they were teenagers and there was that competitiveness between them in terms of talking about R&B and soul music. And Bongo Fury, that's the record I was trying to think of, when they came back together for the Bongo Fury tour. I knew it would come to me eventually. When they were hanging out and listening to records together and quizzing each other, there was already this repartee that was going on between them that could have easily been exacerbated into a more hostile or even something that vacillated between diffidence and hostility. But I'll leave you with these words by Steve Peacock, who wrote this for the magazine Peacock. Zappa is a fine technician, a craftsman with a wealth of expert knowledge on what he draws to construct intricate, though bizarre, set pieces of music. He blends absurdity, outrage, with an extensive, wide-ranging set of musical reference points. Listening to Zappa's music is a thoroughly enjoyable experience, and there is an emotive quality. The overriding effect, however, is intellectual. Frank Zappa constructs and controls his music. It is, for the most part, conscious creation. Captain Beefheart opens up and lets it flow. Frank Zappa is shrewd. Beefheart is a visionary. I hope you enjoyed my deep dive into Trout Mask Replica. Leave your own thoughts in the down under, please. Maybe you love it, maybe you hate it. Maybe you're still scratching your head. I have told people that I like both Beefheart and Zappa immensely, but I have focused my primary interest and also my collecting on Frank Zappa because his music is it just has a little stronger appeal to me, And I think it's primarily because of his guitar playing. You know, just fantastic guitar solos. But I really love Beefheart just about as much as I do Zappa's music. So, you know, as I say, you know, share your thoughts, please. I do hope you enjoyed this. And always remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.